Good morning, everyone. All information contained herein is provided solely for educational purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for professional or legal advice. Should you decide to act upon any information contained in this presentation, you do so at your own risk. While the information posted has been verified to the best of our abilities, we cannot guarantee that there are no mistakes or errors. This is the Enviroschool program at the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Today, we are presenting LDEQ's New Vision 2021, an evolving approach to the TMDL program. I'm Tunica Bayou, coordinator for Enviroschool, and I will be moderating today. We will be muting everyone except for the speaker. However, just as a precaution, go ahead and keep yourself muted individually as well. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A option. Type in your questions and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and a recording of this webinar will be available on the Enviroschool website. And I will email you once it's all posted. There will be a poll at the end of this webinar to provide your feedback so we can improve our sessions. So please complete before logging off. Email any comments, questions, or concerns to enviroschool@la.gov. Our speaker today is Mr. Chuck Berger. Chuck received a BS in Civil Engineering from LSU in 1992. He joined LDEQ's TMDL Engineering section in 1996 and is now a senior engineer in the Water Planning and Assessment Division. He serves as the state's lead advisor and contact on water quality modeling and TMDL alternative development issues. Mr. Berger has provided modeling and TMDL consultation to local governments, contractors, and permit writers in addition to developing or overseeing the development of water quality models, TMDLs, and TMDL alternatives for many Louisiana streams. Mr. Berger has served as Louisiana's lead participant in EPA and the state's development of the new long-term vision for assessment, restoration, and protection under the Clean Water Act Section 303D program. Mr. Berger assisted with development of the state's prioritization framework and priority water bodies under the new vision. He is currently planning activities for New Vision 2.0, assisting with the development of TMDL alternative plans for the priority water bodies, overseeing the revision of existing TMDLs, providing oversight and guidance on hydrologic issues as they relate to water quality, and providing permit support relating to TMDL and anti-degradation issues. As of July 2018, Mr. Berger has actively participated in Louisiana's Watershed Initiative, a watershed-based approach to manage future flood risk and provide sustainability and resilience in Louisiana. Chuck, you may begin.
Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about the new vision, and to do that, we're going to give a little bit of background on the TMDL program. And we've got a lot of information. Some of it we're going to go through pretty quickly, but I think everybody will understand and we'll get all your questions answered. So what is a TMDL? It stands for total maximum daily load. It's basically the sum of all the point source loads, the non-point source loads, the margin of safety, and recently we've started adding future growth in there. It's essentially, I like to think of it as a pollutant budget for the water body. It must, the loading that it goes into TMDL must demonstrate that it's going to meet the existing water quality criteria for whatever parameter you're looking at. It can be done for any parameter. It also involves very complex modeling, especially when you're looking at dissolved oxygen and nutrients. So the regulations were established as part of the Clean Water Act, and they're put into the Code of Federal Regulations. And they basically say that a state must identify impaired waters establish a priority ranking for TMDL development, and TMDLs must be established for those pollutants suspected to cause the impairment. Must be completed for all water body parameter combinations, but a higher priority is given to the impaired water bodies. And in the past, especially when we're under consent decree, if the states did not develop the TMDLs, EPA had to develop them. That is not so much the case anymore, as you'll see why later on. But as I said, in 1996, we were, the EPA was sued in many states throughout the country. They were sued in regards to TMDLs in Louisiana in 1996, and we completed that consent decree in 2012, and the result, there was over 700 TMDLs developed for Louisiana water bodies, covering many different parameters. And some of those we had to develop TMDLs for water bodies where the criteria was in question. And the result of some of those is they required some nutrient monitoring of permitted facilities. An example of one of those TMDLs that was done under the consent decree was Grays Creek. Again, there we did a phased TMDL approach because there was questions about the criteria in that area of the state. And for new dischargers, they had to demonstrate that their loading would provide reductions of the overall man-made load by taking in maybe unsewered areas or other facilities, or they had to demonstrate that their wastewater would not leave the facility. And that's all, this language came straight from the TMDL, so it's pretty detailed as to what it would allow. For the existing dischargers, we had a significant reduction in loading. It's laid out here. Facilities with a discharge of greater than or equal to 25,000 went to discharge limits of 10 for BOD5, 2 for ammonia, and 5 for DO. And those with flow greater than 25,000 went to 525. And then there were some facilities that already had the more stringent permit limits, so we left those the same. It also required nutrient monitoring for all the dischargers, total nitrogen, total phosphorus, and annual reduction 85% of the overall non-point loading. There's just a map of Grays Creek and the locations where we sampled to develop the model and TMDL. One of the results of the pending TMDL in load reductions that we knew were going to be required, and we were meeting with the city of Denham Springs well in advance of the TMDL, and they replaced an existing municipal wastewater treatment plant for the city with a much more advanced plant. And it, at least as of the data collected in 2009 and 2010, we had significant load reductions that were expected to help the water body overall. So that's just an example of what the TMDLs look like and what they've done. Around 2012, states started talking about doing something better. Program prior to 2012 was judged, or the success was measured by something called the TMDL PACE, which basically just doing reports to meet a pre-described number. And a lot of states wanted to do something that was more meaningful, more directed at achieving water quality goals and water quality improvements. So we started talking, and it really was state driven, at least initially. And we came up with the new long-term vision for assessment, restoration, and protection under the Clean Water Section 303D program, complete with a mission statement and 6 goals goal statement, and the time period for this first part of the new vision was 2016 to 2022. I'm not going to read all of this, but the mission statement is there and it'll be in the presentation that we can make available to you. The important part is it's 6 goal statements, particularly with the prioritization goal statement. Previously, our priorities were set by courts and said that we had to do certain TMDLs by a certain date. Now, recognize that states had limited resources and the states get to set their own priorities. And then their performance is judged based on the completion of whatever those priorities were. Another big change is that whereas before we were focusing on impaired water bodies, we can now choose to focus on healthy watersheds to keep them from going impaired. And that is the protection goal statement. Another significant change was the engagement. Was more focus on being placed on engagement with the public, as well as integration across different water programs. Focus on partnering with other groups that want to achieve similar goals. Another really big change was that now we could focus on something we call TMDL alternatives, whereas before our performance was judged based on the completion of TMDLs and TMDLs being the only tool in the toolbox. Now with TMDL alternatives, we can create tailored strategies to achieve the water quality goals. And it basically, to us, meant anything is on the table, could involve in different enforcement actions, implementation actions, ordinances, you name it. And then the assessment goal is kind of, to me, was initially an extension of some things we already do, which we already test our water bodies, but it may go a little bit beyond that as we focus on TMDL alternatives in evaluating the effectiveness of the alternatives that we're conducting in a watershed. So one of the first things we had to do is come up with a way to prioritize our water bodies and figure out which ones we were going to work on. And we developed something that's called a framework for Louisiana, and it's available on our website. But some of the things we looked at areas where the criteria was in question and revisions were being considered that maybe we would not focus on those at the time. We also looked at water quality trends. We had staff that was working on that at the time, so we were able to see if water quality was trending upward or downward or holding steady. Considered the degree of impairment. Permitting needs is a huge consideration. Restoration potential. There's something that EPA has called the Recovery Potential Tool, which looks at social, stressor, and 3 different types of indicators. I forget what the third one is. I think ecological, which would refers to, how the water body might respond to different improvements. We considered local government input, different water quality initiatives, nutrient management strategy, stakeholder input, funding, working with other agencies, and we started looking at who might be our partners. Of course, different local governments as well as federal agencies and state agencies. So we came up with our priority watersheds for 2016 through 2022. We initially had another one added to this, but as we got to doing reconnaissance surveys and investigating area, we didn't see a clear path to success. There was a lot of accessibility issues to getting to the water body. But we ended up with Tunica Bayou, Yellow Water River, Natalbany River, Bayou Sara, Blind River, and New River. There's just a map of showing the layout of where they are. And we did kind of consider that, hey, if we're going to be working on Yellow Water River, we might want to work on the Natalbany River as well, expecting that they're going to have similar issues. And so just the logistics makes it a little better. And the same thing for New River and Blind River and Tunica Bayou and Bayou Sara. When we started this journey at the national level, a lot of people had questions about what is an alternative. And we kind of had to figure it out for ourselves, but just say that EPA is now approving the use of watershed restoration or protection plans and alternative activities where appropriate, as well as traditional TMDLs for meeting the requirements of the Clean Water Act. TMDLs are not always the appropriate tool. There's a lot of states that have been doing some things that were called straight to implementation. You know what the problem is? TMDLs can take a few $100,000 to develop. Why not go straight to implementation and solve the problem? I like to think of it as a tailored strategy for restoration and protection. And of course, we've been focused on the outreach, and by better engaging local citizens, you're more likely to have success. We've also incorporated media and web-based outreach efforts. We're working with our existing ambient monitoring schedule, and we're supplementing it with data that we collect for each project. We've been conducting some sweeps in some areas, inspecting individual homes as well as the point source dischargers. And we're dealing with the pollutant sources as directly as possible. And a lot of the goal has been to get all treatment units up to code and operating properly, and working with local governments as needed to develop any ordinances. Can't say that we have done that to date, but that has been considered and discussed. And pretty much anything is on the table for as a restoration effort. Some of the things that we've done with site visits, education and outreach, monitoring and assessment, data analysis, evaluating land uses, inspection of the permanent dischargers, as well as the on-site disposal systems, reviewing facility history, seeing if what type of violations they've had. And then once all that's done, it's just a matter of telling the story. So we've taken some corrective actions. We've held public meetings and seeking input from local government and citizens. And the goal there is to create local stewards of the watershed. Again, we've, had some facilities refer to enforcement, and working to get those up to code, establish best management practices for non-point sources as needed. And largely that has been working with our partners to inspect the individual home units. The EQ has a longstanding relationship with contractors that handle that. And they also work with the Louisiana Department of Health. So again, we're working with the local governments and organizations, and we developing a lot of these things as we learn what the issues are and learn from the citizens. So how does this benefit you? Number one, secure the availability of future growth and development for future businesses and citizens and generations. Ensure good water quality is available to future generations. Provide clean water in your lakes, rivers, bayous, and ditches. Ensure a stable watershed and channel for future generations. Learn how activities conducted in the watershed affect the water quality and how water quality affects your daily life, and have input into the restoration and protection activities. Get to have participation into things going on in your community, more flexibility and less restriction. Again, TMDLs would normally come in and just say, nope, no more loading, or you've got to greatly reduce the loading. Address impairments directly and efficiently. learn about natural functions of the watershed and how hydrology and water quality go together. Part of the goal of our outreach is to help people understand how water quality works and how the environmental processes work. How might this impact you? Well, non-compliant permitted facilities will be required to make repairs and upgrades. Unpermitted facilities will be required to obtain a DEQ permit. Non-functioning individual home units will be encouraged to make repairs and may require some behavioral cultural changes out there, and maybe some new ordinances or codes. So let's say we conduct these TMDL alternatives and complete, but the water body is still impaired. Well, at that point, you know, we should have corrected all the malfunctioning systems and have a good, accurate accounting of the dischargers and the loading sources. At some point, we'll have to do a TMDL if the criteria is not met. May require more stringent permit limits and may restrict new development. So the goal here is to kind of, you know, if we you know, eliminate the water quality impairments, maybe we don't have to do a TMDL. But if we make all the corrections and the water body is still impaired, eventually we'll have to do a TMDL. So talk about the first water body. It was Tunica Bayou. It's located north of Baton Rouge area, right along the border to the Mississippi, state of Mississippi, and right along the Mississippi River. Beautiful area, lots of wilderness and diverse wildlife. Very rural area. This is just Google Earth presentation of some of the things we found out there. There's a lot of what appeared to be camps located right along the bayou. If you look at this channel here, that is Tunica Bayou, just upstream of the assessment site. And we had a number of residences there and a convenience store. And just south of here, we had a post office that operated a couple hours a day. The impairment was for fecal coliform. And one of the things we did, there was a couple of systems in here that were, the issues were resolved there. And then at the post office, we had apparently some longstanding issues there that we were able to get corrected. And, you know, a very large fecal coliform issue at the post office. But we were able to get that referred to enforcement and to get it resolved. So we met with the West Feliciana Parish President. We completed the monitoring. The restoration plan was accepted by EPA on October 5th of 2020. We inspected the individual home units and the point source dischargers. As I said, several of them are repaired. And we continue to review the data and assessments as of the 2020 IR. The impairments remain out there, but have they improved any? That's something we'll have to see. I know in the case of fecal coliform, it can be kind of seasonal. You can have high levels one year and low levels the next. A lot of it is associated with runoff. So some of this fecal coliform issue out there may be wildlife. Looking at yellow water in the Natalbany River, again, they're located right next to each other along the borders of Livingston, Kansapoa, and St. Helena parishes. I'm not going to read all of this information here, but it just give you some idea of the things we looked at in yellow water in Natalbany, and all of them really looked at water quality trends. You can see that, you know, some of these values, 1.21, 3.2, I'm not sure, but those seem to be kind of high in comparison to some other water bodies. So some of this information is the reason why we selected these water bodies. So we looked at the impairment history. And again, Yellow Water River is impaired as of 2020. Why is it impaired? Upper Natalbany River and Lower Natalbany River. We recently split this subsegment into two subsegments. So the subsegment 040507 was first assessed in 2018. So it's a relatively new subsegment. And a lot of the data that was collected for Upper Natalbany, or is shown up here as for Upper Natalbany, was really applied to the entire subsegment prior to them being split. So then just looking at some of the ambient monitoring data, can kind of get an idea of why they were listed as impaired or not listed. Looking at dissolved oxygen as of the 2017 and 2018 data, 16.7% fell below the LDEQ criterion, and the maximum allowable is 10%. So looking at fecal coliform data, you know, it looks like we still have impairments based on the 2017 and 2018 data. Now this data was collected after the 2017, 2018 data was collected after we decided to use these water bodies as part of our priority watersheds. But the important thing here is to, you know, that this is the type of information we looked at to make the selections. Same thing for Natalbany River. And then we looked at potential loading sources, with the Yellow Water River having approximately 97 permitted point sources and Natalbany River having about 132. Now, we did get access to data from the Louisiana Department of Health and indicated that there's approximately 15 to 1,600 those individual home units in Yellow Water River and a little over 4,000 in Natalbany. From what we've seen and looking at aerial photography and comparing it to these numbers, that these numbers are approximately half of what's out there. And that'll be more important when we get to some of the other watersheds that we're going to talk about. So where are we now? We've monitored 8 sites in Yellow Water River. We noted some high fecal coliform concentrations and total dissolved solids. We weren't originally looking at the total dissolved solids, but wherever we can resolve while we're out there, we're going to do it. We've done some various investigations out there based on the either facilities that were reported to us, and we put them into SPOC, or you know, looking at the data and seeing high concentrations, you know, we send somebody out to look at it. There was some clearing and snagging that was conducted in discrete areas of the watershed, and that has happened in several of these watersheds that we're going to be looking at. We conducted public outreach and education, and we started some citizen-based groups out there in Tangipahoa Parish for both Yellow Water River and the Natalbany River. We met with the parish president in the beginning, and usually they ask us to present to their parish council, and so we did that. We formed those citizen groups. We've partnered with Tangipahoa Parish to get water quality education into the schools, and we've been really excited about that. And we provided them with materials, and we're even able to go out and visit one of the schools with them just before the lockdowns happened for COVID-19. We're also working with this group of citizens out there to plan additional outreach type presentations, similar to what we're doing right now. We're working on citizen partners, local stewards of the watersheds, and actually in Yellow Water River, we're developing a draft report at this time. Excuse me. We've completed monitoring 12 sites in the Natalbany River. We halted the monitoring earlier this year, except for monitoring at one site, and that's we're monitoring site 298 to assist our contractors that are out there inspecting in individual home units. We've inspected permitted point source dischargers, and we're halting the monitoring now, but we may come back later to monitor some more and see the effectiveness of the activities that we've conducted out there. The same outreach that I mentioned before for Yellow Water River was conducted also for Natalbany River. We expect the draft report in late 2021 or early 2022. And again, this New Vision 1.0 is going to be wrapping up in September of 2022. So Bayou Sara is near St. Francisville, Louisiana, just to the southeast of Tunica Bayou. We're looking at fecal coliform there. And again, we went through the impairment history. As of the 2018 and 2020 integrated reports, we no longer had a fecal coliform impairment. So we were considering that as a bit of a success story. And what happened there is that our internal partners at DEQ, inspectors, had conducted investigations throughout the watershed and inspected all the point source dischargers. And then we collected the next round of monitoring data, and it showed no impairment. So we think a lot of that was a result of the inspections that were done. Again, discussion like before of the ambient monitoring data. You can see that in 2012 and 2013 monitoring that we had some impairments there and exceedances of criteria beyond the maximum allowable exceedance. However, based on the data that was collected in 2019 and 2020, it appears we will have at least some impairments for primary contact recreation again. So it's possible that it's going to be listed in 2022. So what's going on there? That's the question we want to answer. We looked at the potential loading sources. Approximately 31 point source dischargers, and estimated over 1,100 of those individual on-site disposal systems. Where are we now? Again, we met with the West Feliciana Parish President. We've addressed several malfunctioning systems. We were looking to do a success story there, but you know, we'll have to see what the impairments work out to be. But again, successes can be defined several different ways. The primary the biggest success story was to get it removed from the impaired water bodies list. However, The success could also be that we create watershed stewards in the watershed. If we could show, a certain percentage of water quality improvements, those are all forms of success as well. So now to Blind River and New River. There's a lot going on in these watersheds. We looked at the water quality trends. Looked at impairment histories, and we looked at loading sources like before. Both of these watersheds were on our original consent decree, but due to circumstances at the time, we did not have to do them, create TMDLs for them at the time. Looking at the loading sources, 2 subsegments of Blind River, 040401 didn't have any known permitted facilities, but had approximately 91 of those individual disposal systems. 040403 had about 112 permitted point source dischargers and approximately 2,473 of the individual wastewater treatment systems. And then in New River, we estimate there's approximately 368 point source dischargers and close to 8,000 of the individual on-site disposal systems. And remember that based on what we saw before, that's estimated there's approximately twice that amount out there. And based on numbers of talking with the parish, that would agree with that. They have estimated in the past approximately 16,000 throughout the parish. So where are we now? We've met with the parish president and parish council, presented to them several times. We would like to establish citizen advisory groups out there like we have done in the Tangipahoa parish area. We began monitoring New River in the summer of 2021, earlier this year. Blind River is expected to start in the fall of 2021. We plan to inspect the point source dischargers in individual home wastewater treatment plants as well. And we expect the draft reports in late 2022, early 2023. So moving forward, what were some lessons learned in New Vision 1.0? Thoughtful consideration, adaptive. COVID-19 has impacted some of our activities, especially getting out and doing the outreach and the survey work to some extent. The TMDL alternatives are much more resource intensive than traditional TMDLs. With traditional TMDLs, depending on the parameter you're looking at, they're developed either by using whatever data you have already collected in-house or is already available to you, or going out and collecting survey data, particularly for dissolved oxygen TMDLs. And that usually takes about a week to collect that data. Takes a little longer than that to plan it all out, but you're about a week's time actually collecting data. With the TMDL alternatives, we've been collecting monthly data for about a year to a year and a half. So it's much more resource intensive. Once you start peeling back the layers of the onion and finding out what the problems are, it can be much more intensive on the analysis side of it. Of course, the engagement and coordination is more resources there, but it's well worth it. Coordinating with the watershed survey staff and a 9-point group and progressing while taking on new activities like increased levels of water permit support and working with the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. So all these things we learn, taking on new activities, we're still able to keep it going forward. So moving forward, New Vision 2.0, again, thoughtful consideration, always taking and applying the things we learn. We're still utilizing most of the steps of New Vision 1.0 with a focus on coordination with our non-point source program and water permits division. We're planning for the next 10 years. It's going to be 2023 through 2032. And we're breaking that up into years 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and 7 through 10 for our purposes as to, we're going to set up a group of priority waters for years 1 through 3, another group for 4 through 6, and another 7 through 10. Now, the reporting to EPA is going to work out a little differently than that, and it's going to align more with our integrated report, which occurs every 2 years. So that's something that's on the back end, though, and behind the scenes, so to speak, and will not be something that's readily observable to the public. It's more for the reporting purposes to the EPA. We're going to, instead of focusing only on TMDL revisions, we're going to include a mix of new TMDLs, TMDL revisions, and TMDL alternatives. That'll help our survey crew with the intensiveness of the resources and collecting the data. It also helps us to, go out and address some things that we have some old TMDLs that need updating, and so we'll be able to do that. We're also considering new types of alternative restoration projects to better address issues, and just stay tuned on that. Expanding the idea of what a TMDL alternative can be. And for more information, you can go to any one of these links and provide the information on the TMDL process or the New Vision approach to the TMDL process. You can go to newvision.303d@la.gov and email us for more information or to provide information as well. We're also always looking for people to work with us and provide information to us, as well as to educate those that want additional information. That's my contact information, as well as the contact information for the manager of the group. And just a few parting shots. I like to leave people with some good quotes. Your job is to help the river be whatever it wants to be. That's Dave Roskin, a well-known hydrologist. Water is the most critical resource issue of our lifetime and our children's lifetime. The health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. That's Luna Leopold, former, I think, director of the USGS. Fairest thing in nature, a flower still has its roots in earth and manure, by D.H. Lawrence. Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts, by Winston Churchill. And success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal, Earl Nightingale. I thought those all applied to what we're talking about here. And additional resources, part of our outreach, I forgot to mention it, but I had a slide in there. You can go to DEQ's YouTube channel, and we've created several videos that could basically be providing information to people when we're not able to be there. And one of the first ones was to maintain home sewage system. And then we have a program-based video to explain what we're doing with the New Vision approach. So go out, check those out. They're only a few minutes long. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Thanks for participating, everyone. I hope this information is helpful to you and that you will join us again for an Enviroschool webinar.